He didn't walk into that courtroom with a suit, a badge, or a name they'd recognize, just scuffed shoes, cuffed wrists, and a silence that unsettled the air. They called him defendant, smirked when he didn't flinch, but behind his stillness was a truth they never saw coming. What happens when the man they laughed at holds the keys to all their careers? The hallway smelled of varnished wood and stale confidence. Shoes tapped out rhythms of entitlement, wingtips and pumps pacing along polished floors like they owned the light. And then came the shuffle. Scuffed sneakers, zip-up jacket, cuffs cinched just tight enough to bruise. Two officers flanked the man like he was dangerous. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't speaking. He just walked, chin up, as if the marble beneath his soles should have known better. Inside courtroom for B, the judge hadn't looked up. The clerk didn't blink. The prosecutor leaned back like this was lunch. All of them saw what they wanted. A man in holding blues, dark-skinned, silent. Another case, another day. Jeremiah Cole stood still at the defense table. Back straight, eyes level, a scratch above his brow still crusted with dried blood. No one asked. The officer who brought him in gave a smirk like a reward. "You can sit now," he said, smug. Jeremiah didn't. The prosecutor was pale, young, and practiced in pretending not to look directly at defendants. She flipped a page, didn't raise her head, and said, "Name, please." Silence. She finally looked up, expecting confusion. Instead, she met calm. Eyes that didn't plead. They recorded. 1 beat. 2. Then, Jeremiah Cole. The room didn't react, but the smirk from the cop on the bench twitched. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said, drawing out the "Mr." "Like it didn't belong. You were found loitering near the Hart building. No ID. Refused to speak. Aggressive posture. Does that sound about right?" Jeremiah blinked once. "Is that a question or a story?" The judge cleared his throat. The courtroom chuckled softly. But the officer beside the prosecutor leaned in and whispered. He had earbuds in. Ignored commands. Walked like he owned the place. Owned the place. Interesting choice of words. The judge wore tired robes and an older man's disinterest. He peered over the edge of his glasses, voice echoing with condescension. "We get a lot of this. Misunderstandings. Miscommunication. Happens when folks don't follow instructions." He wasn't speaking to Jeremiah. He was speaking about him. Jeremiah let the words pass like wind through lattice. No twitch. No protest. The prosecutor smoothed her blouse. "We recommend 2 days holding time pending ID verification." He was combative with Capitol Police. That word again. Combative. The courtroom nodded like they'd all agreed on a script. Even the defense attorney, a public appointee with overstuffed folders and an apologetic hunch, barely made eye contact. But Jeremiah looked at the clock. Not because he was impatient. Because someone in Langley was now 10 minutes late on a check-in protocol. The machine had already started moving. They just didn't know they were inside it. A bailiff placed a document on the judge's bench. Routine. Unnoticed. But Jeremiah's eyes flicked toward the margins. Scanned the watermark, the corner fold. Not from this court. Not from this state. The clerk misread it and placed it in the wrong file. Jeremiah didn't correct her. Across the aisle, one of the officers nudged his partner. "Dude hasn't said 10 words. Think he even speaks English." Jeremiah spoke 6 languages fluently. He just didn't waste any of them on small men. The prosecutor adjusted her notes again. "Your Honor, we'd like to proceed with formal charges while verification is pending." Time of arrest was 8:12 a.m. Suspect was found near a secured zone without identification or cooperation. Jeremiah raised his hand slightly. The entire room paused. "Yes," the judge said, annoyed. "I asked if I could make a call at the station," he said calmly. The officer said, and I quote, "You people make enough noise without phones." Silence. The judge looked at the officers. They didn't flinch. Neither did Jeremiah. The courtroom's air had changed. Not loud but tighter. Like the walls were listening now. The prosecutor kept going. But her tone had a hitch. Jeremiah's calm was making the room feel unsteady. We also found no record of employment or permanent address linked to Mr. Cole. Our databases. Which database? The question cut in like a scalpel. The judge raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? The prosecutor asked. Jeremiah looked at her for the first time. Looked. You said no record. Which database did you check? The prosecutor faltered. NCIC. Homeland. Public Registry. Not State Department? She blinked. No. He nodded once. Then your data's incomplete. No one spoke. The defense attorney looked up for the first time. The hallway outside ticked with footsteps. Inside, the courtroom slowed. The judge shifted in his seat. Are you suggesting we missed something? Jeremiah tilted his head slightly. No. I'm suggesting you never looked. The bailiff's radio crackled softly. Someone was asking about 4B and confirming presence. The officer next to the prosecutor muted it. The tension had shape now, like fog that knew your name. The prosecutor sighed. This is stalling. The suspect. Defendant, Jeremiah corrected. I'm not a suspect. You filed charges. Don't cheapen your paperwork. Even the stenographer glanced up. The judge leaned back and rubbed his forehead. You clearly know your way around legal terminology. Jeremiah remained still. My work requires precision. Where do you work, Mr. Cole? A pause. Jeremiah looked at the clock again. Let's just say, he said quietly, people in your office might want to review today's docket carefully. The prosecutor scoffed. That a threat? He didn't answer, because truth doesn't threaten. It waits. The defense attorney fumbled for a file and dropped it. Papers scattered. One fluttered across to the prosecutor's feet. She picked it up, scanned it. It was blank on top, but stamped on the bottom corner was a faded seal. A federal one, not this court's. She froze for half a second before slipping it into her briefcase. Jeremiah noticed, didn't say a word. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, hands still cuffed, and smiled. Just once. The final moment before recess landed like a whisper with weight. The judge was preparing to call for a delay. The prosecutor was reaching for her water, and the courtroom doors creaked open. A woman in a gray suit, no coat, walked in briskly with a leather folder pressed flat to her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She walked straight to the clerk, whispered something, then placed the folder on the bench, marked with a seal none of them had clearance to touch. Jeremiah never turned around. He just said, under his breath, 10 minutes late. Langley's slipping. The courtroom clock ticked like a metronome of judgment. He didn't wear a badge today. No tailored suit, no flag pin. Just a pressed gray button-down, worn boots, and the kind of stillness that comes from decades of not needing to prove a damn thing. Yet the bailiff smirked when he walked in. I scanned him like luggage, checked, cleared, dismissed. A whisper here, a chuckle there. Laughter dressed in uniforms and polished pride. Defendant number 12, the clerk called out. His name was never spoken. They saw a black man with calm eyes and calloused hands. They didn't see the director of counterintelligence, freshly returned from an operation classified higher than their whole careers. And when one officer leaned back and mouthed, another one, that was the moment he knew. Today he wouldn't correct them. Not yet. The courthouse smelled of cold metal and burnt coffee. Mornings here were a carousel of judgments and plea bargains. But his presence stopped something, like a gear grinding against rusted teeth. A young public defender approached, brow furrowed, posture tight. I'll do my best, sir, she whispered, assuming this was his first arrest, maybe his first time on this side of the bench. He only nodded. Across the aisle, 2 officers sat slouched, whispering, one laughing just loud enough to be heard. Bet he resists. They always do. The judge hadn't arrived, but the theater had already begun. A court officer asked him, "You sure you're supposed to be up here?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm sure." No one asked his name. They didn't care. When the judge finally entered, the room straightened, except the sneer on Officer Mullen's face. He kept one leg crossed, his boot tapping like a countdown. The prosecutor, young, overconfident, adjusted her blazer and raised her voice. Your Honor, the defendant was found on federal grounds acting suspiciously, refusing to show ID. He raised an eyebrow. I said I didn't have it on me. Exactly. Her tone shifted. Uncooperative. He stood. Slowly. The room shifted. Quietly. Like someone had drawn a curtain and sunlight hit the wrong side of things. But he didn't speak. Not yet. Let the record show, the prosecutor continued. The defendant refused to identify himself and was detained for failure to comply. A soft snort from the bench. The judge, tired, white, mid-60s, looked over his glasses. Mister? The judge asked, fumbling for the docket. The clerk leaned in. No ID. We booked him as John Doe 17. Laughter again. But not from him. He stared straight ahead, posture unshaken. I asked if you have any comment, the judge repeated. He met the judge's eyes. No comment yet. It wasn't defiance. It was precision. In the back row, a court reporter glanced up. Something about the way the man spoke. The silence that followed. The stillness of someone who could afford patience. She'd seen plenty of defendants fold. But not like this. She scribbled faster. Meanwhile, Officer Mullins leaned to his partner. Can't wait to see this one try and argue his way out. Probably quote Malcolm X in a minute. The partner chuckled. Behind them, the man's eyes didn't move. But he heard every word and still said nothing. Outside the courtroom, an assistant DA whispered to a clerk, he's not in the system. That's weird. Clerks shrugged. Might be off-grid. Homeless. The judge shuffled papers. We'll recess until identity is confirmed. Mullins stretched. Don't worry, he muttered. We'll dig him up. At that, the man finally spoke, barely above a whisper. You won't have to dig far. The voice was too calm, too certain. The room fell a notch quieter. Even the judge looked up. But the moment passed. The gavel fell. At the vending machine, Mullins laughed with his partner. Another guy trying to play chess without a board. Back inside, the courtroom began to fill again. Spectators filtered in, parents, students, a journalist or two. No one noticed the small pin clipped beneath the man's sleeve. Gold and cobalt. A symbol almost no one would recognize unless they needed to. It glinted once when he shifted his wrist. Just once. But no one caught it. Not yet. He was led back into court in handcuffs. Standard procedure, they said. Even as he walked freely. He allowed it. For now. The judge returned. Has identification been confirmed? The clerk hesitated. No, sir. Fingerprint search came back. Sealed. Sealed? The prosecutor echoed. The clerk nodded. It's beyond our clearance. Mullins blinked. What the hell? But he still smirked. Probably some old juvenile record. Still, he adjusted his tie. Slightly. Then came the phone call. A short buzz. The bailiff picked up the courthouse line. Listened. Stiffened. He walked to the judge and whispered something low. The judge looked over at the man in cuffs. Then at the prosecutor. Then at the officers. And paused. Who exactly are you? The man finally smiled. A soft, amused thing. Shouldn't that have been your first question? The courtroom froze. The judge stood. So did the prosecutor. So did the public defender. But not the man in cuffs. He remained seated. Calm. The kind of calm that made you feel like you missed something. And outside the courtroom doors, two men in black suits approached, silent, deliberate. One held a folder stamped, top secret. The other carried a badge. Not a police badge, but a federal one. And with it, everything was about to change. The bailiff cleared his throat, trying not to look surprised as he glanced down at the updated docket. Langston's name had shifted. Not the placement, just the designation. And he noticed something. The federal seal now hovered above the case number. At the defense table, Langston finally crossed his legs. Calmly, deliberately, the same way someone might fold a linen napkin before dinner. Judge Leland looked up, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Mr. Kane, you're representing yourself today?" Langston offered a polite nod. "Yes, Your Honor. Fully authorized." A long pause. His voice didn't match the orange jumpsuit. From the back row, two women whispered. One of them was the younger black woman from earlier, Marcia, a law student doing court observation. She leaned toward her friend. "That man doesn't look like he belongs in cuffs," she murmured. "He's watching them like he's the judge." The prosecutor laughed, dry and nasal. "We'll see how far that attitude gets you." He barely glanced at the file in front of him, still underestimating the man 2 feet away. Langston's eyes didn't leave him. "You're right. We will." The first witness was called. A local patrol officer with too many decorations and too little memory. He fumbled over the traffic stop, the supposed resisting arrest, the alleged odor that justified the search. Langston didn't object once. Not yet. When cross-examination came, Langston stood slowly. The courtroom quieted. There was a rhythm to his movement, like a conductor raising the baton. "No body cam footage?" he asked. The officer shrugged. "Technical issues. No radio logs?" System was down. Langston raised a single eyebrow. "Convenient." A flicker of discomfort passed through the jury box. A white woman in a tan blazer shifted in her seat. A black man with salt and pepper locks tilted forward, curious now. Langston stepped closer to the witness. "Were you aware that the street you stopped me on has 4 working surveillance cameras?" The officer hesitated. "I didn't." "You didn't check." "I was following procedure." Langston nodded. "Your procedure, not the law." The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I'd like to hear this," he continued, calm. "I see. Did you know the suspect was unarmed, compliant, and verbally identified himself as a federal agent?" The officer blinked. I didn't recognize." Langston stepped back, still watching him. No further questions. There was no gasp, no music cue, just silence, the kind that follows the truth when it begins to bleed through the seams. In the gallery, Marcia scribbled furiously into her notebook. "This isn't normal," she whispered. Judge Leland leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Kane, just for the record, what division did you say you worked in?" Langston looked directly at her. "I didn't. Yet." Her lips parted. Outside, rain had begun to patter against the courthouse windows. Inside, the tension had thickened, like the storm outside had crept in, waiting. Langston glanced toward the jury. One man nodded at him, almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, Langston allowed the corners of his mouth to lift. Not a smile, a warning. The room didn't breathe. Langston stood still, hands loosely resting on the edge of the defendant's table. His eyes scanned the jury box, not pleading, not even defending, studying. The prosecutor chuckled again, but it landed flat this time. No one joined him. Langston reached slowly into the manila folder they'd allowed him. Every movement deliberate, not a single wasted breath. He pulled out a photo, placed it on the evidence screen. It was grainy, time-stamped, parking garage camera. An officer, same one now squirming in the witness box, reaching into Langston's glove compartment without a warrant. The room twitched. "You said the search was justified because I gave consent," Langston said, voice level. The officer nodded quickly. Too quickly. Langston zoomed in. His face, in the still, showed his mouth taped shut, blood drying on his cheek. The jury flinched. Langston's voice dropped. "Did I give consent with duct tape on my mouth?" No one answered, not even the judge. The prosecutor started objecting in quick bursts. Flustered. Langston didn't raise his voice. "You'll want to sit down." And when the man didn't, Langston added, "Director Wexler is watching." Confused silence. "Director who?" the judge asked. Langston didn't answer. He clicked to the next image. An internal memo. Official FBI letterhead. Redacted names except one. Langston Kane. Title: Supervisory Special Agent in Charge. Office of Internal Oversight. The gallery gasped. Langston looked at the judge. We'll get to the rest shortly. The prosecutor dropped his pen. Langston leaned into the mic. Would you like to continue this examination, Your Honor, or shall I? The judge opened his mouth, then closed it. I'm not impersonating counsel, Langston continued, eyes like steel. I'm investigating a multi-agency breakdown in civil procedure, led by this department. You're all just late to the realization. Camera phones came up in the gallery now. Slowly, cautiously, a tide turning without noise. The bailiff took a half-step toward Langston, then froze. Recognition flickered behind his eyes. Langston turned. You ran my prints, correct? The bailiff nodded, slowly. And, Langston said, they were sealed under federal directive, he stammered. We were told to not proceed. Langston nodded just once. You did anyway. The female officer on the witness list was suddenly nowhere to be found. The judge called recess without looking anyone in the eye. But no one left the room. Langston remained standing. The press had begun to fill in now. Faces at the back. Some familiar, some hungry. A voice from the gallery broke the silence. Who is he? Langston didn't turn. He didn't need to. The prosecutor was sweating now, visibly. Papers trembled in his hands. Langston finally sat down, calm, assured, like a man not worried about the verdict, but about the room he was now auditing. Outside the courthouse, murmurs had begun. A black man in cuffs outsmarting the prosecution? That wasn't just a headline, it was a reckoning. Inside, Langston motioned to the court reporter. Please retrieve document 172B. It's sealed, but I've unlocked it. How? The judge asked. Langston didn't answer. He didn't need to. A beat later, the clerk brought it in, eyes wide. Printed email. From the local precinct's chief of police. The subject line, let's bury this. Langston placed it on the projector. Highlighted the first sentence. Officer Grant says the suspect looks too clean-cut to be innocent. Let's frame the drugs on the passenger seat. The silence shattered like glass. Now the prosecutor was shaking. He stood to object, but Langston had already moved on. You detained me without cause, Langston said calmly. Held me for 36 hours off record. I was en route to a DC briefing. With my badge. And my weapon. Both disappeared. He clicked to the next photo. A text thread. It read, bag the suit. He thinks he's someone. Langston smiled faintly. I am. The gallery buzzed. Even the stenographer paused, forgetting to type. Langston leaned forward. I warned you, Mr. Feldman. Justice has no interest in loud theatrics. But it does enjoy irony. He looked toward the rear of the courtroom. Two suited men had entered. No badges shown. But they didn't need them. One whispered to the judge. The other to the bailiff. And suddenly, the tension cracked. Like the moment before thunder rolls in. Langston stood again. Mr. Feldman, I'm placing you under review by the Office of Inspector General. The prosecutor's mouth opened, but no sound came. Langston walked toward him, not aggressively, just with purpose, pulled a small folder from his jacket, set it on the prosecutor's table. Inside, screenshots, emails, and one very damning photo. Feldman at a bar with the arresting officer, laughing, time-stamped just hours before Langston's unlawful stop. Conflict of interest is a light term, Langston said. Gasped, whispering. A reporter darted out. Langston didn't move. Instead, he returned to the defendant's seat, placed both palms on the table, and said simply, Now, shall we continue? A low hum filled the courtroom now, like the room itself was waking up. Langston didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood again. Not to speak, just to look. He turned his head slowly to the jury, to the clerk, to the judge, then finally to the cameras now crowding the back. And with a quiet breath, he pressed play on the final clip. A surveillance video. 3 officers. A backroom. Langston's badge. On the table. One of them laughing. I bet he thinks we won't find the Glock in his trunk. Laughter. Then one says, "His name's Cain. Ain't that some slave name?" They laugh harder. Langston pressed pause. He looked toward the officers now seated in the courtroom. Not one met his gaze. The judge spoke softly. "This court needs to recess." Langston shook his head once. "No, the court needs to listen." And with those words, he reached inside his coat one final time, pulled out a slim black wallet, laid it on the table. The judge recognized it instantly. Gold trim, embossed seal, FBI Internal Oversight Director. Langston's title now fully revealed. The entire courtroom inhaled as one. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Escort these officers." Langston interrupted, calmly. "Already done." He turned toward the gallery. They were detained 10 minutes ago by agents stationed outside. People began standing up. Not in panic, in awe. Langston's voice carried without force. "You laughed at a man you thought was weak, poor, powerless." He paused. "You weren't wrong. You were worse." The prosecutor stood slowly. "Sir, I didn't know." Langston raised his hand. "Silence. You didn't care to know." He stepped forward, his voice still composed. "You didn't ask who I was, because you thought you already knew. A beat. Now you do." A woman in the jury box wiped her eyes. The judge simply sat back in his chair, no longer presiding, just witnessing. Langston looked at him. "I won't be pressing charges. Not here." The judge blinked. Langston continued, "I'll let the Federal Review Board do what it was built to do. Strip by strip, rank by rank. Quietly." He turned toward the public gallery now. "You'll forget my face. That's fine." He looked at the cameras. "But you won't forget what happened in this room." He walked to the defense table, picked up his file, tucked the badge away, turned. "No salute." No grand exit. Just the sound of polished shoes across the courtroom floor, each step heavier than applause. Outside, reporters swarmed, yelling his name. Langston said nothing. He stepped into a black car already waiting at the curb. Door closed. Engine started. But the story had already gone live, on every phone, every timeline, every whisper that ever doubted dignity could look like him. In the back seat, he exhaled for the first time that day. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Director." Langston looked out the window. No press, no comment, just drive. The car moved through the gathering crowd like water cutting through stone. No flashing lights.
No sirens.
Just power, silent and earned. Sometimes the system doesn't need to be shouted down, just shown for what it really is. And when the quietest man in the room speaks last, no one dares laugh again. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to Justice Throne for more real-time stories that expose injustice, reveal hidden power, and honor dignity in the face of disrespect. Let us know in the comments. What do you think happened to Langston before this day? Should he have forgiven them or gone further? We read every response. Let your voice be heard.